Welcome to the Presbyterian Church in Cadiz, Ohio. We believe the Presbyterian Church of Cadiz exists to share our faith in Jesus Christ with family, friends, and neighbors through our outreach and mission, worship and spirituality, fellowship, and communication.
A reading from the Gospel according to Mark chapter 13, verses 1 to 8. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." And may God speak to us through these verses today. The title of my sermon is "It's the End of the World as We Know It." Anybody remember that song by REM? Just me. Okay. I love that song. If you listen to that song, it's a comprehensive list of a lot of things that have happened or people, famous events, things like that, kind of culminating in this sense that the world is ending. But then at the end he says, "But I feel fine." I kind of get that impression when I read some of what we call the apocalyptic stories in Scripture. But first, let's get this part out of the way right off the bat. In these verses today, Jesus is not predicting the end of the world. In fact, the Bible does not predict the end of the world. We as Christians do not really believe in the end of the world. I mean, after all, every Sunday morning, we sing as part of the Gloria Patri about a world without end. Amen, amen. And when people were always asking Jesus, "When's the end of the world coming? What is this end of the world about?" He said, "Don't focus on things like that. There are more important things to deal with." Now, of course, this has never stopped people from getting into frenzies about the so-called end of the world. And some people even tend to make a fast buck off things like that. Now, way back in the year 999 AD, for example, Christians all over Europe believed that something catastrophic would happen when the calendar turned to the year 1000. Well, what happened is that the world continued for another 1,000 years. Now, of course, then the buzz about 2000, the year 2000, came along. Another big buzz about end times, but here we are 18 years later. Back in the 1970s, a writer named Hal Lindsey made his fame and fortune with a little book called The Late Great Planet Earth. Anybody remember that book? Mm-hmm. Okay. In that book, Lindsey mapped out the end times with such logic and precision. But then he had to readjust his calculations when world politics did not go the way he predicted they would. In the recent past, the Left Behind book series raked in some serious cash, peddling the same sort of end times vision. Only the names and dates changed. Well, actually, in those books, Jesus kind of changed too. No more Mr. Nice Guy preaching peace and love. The Left Behind Jesus was what Christian writer Martin Marty called Rambo Jesus. This Jesus came back armed and dangerous to destroy his enemies. And the writers of the books seem to take great pleasure in describing this violently and gruesomely. Now, just a few years ago, a preacher named Harold Camping predicted the end of the world. Some of his followers were so convinced it was true that they went out and maxed out their credit cards and they blew their family savings on trips and luxuries. And the idea was, well, we're never going to have to repay any of that. Now, that was interesting Christian behavior, right? And it was not the first time that Camping predicted the end times, and it was not the first time that he was wrong. Fretting over end times can also be used as an excuse for shirking Christian responsibilities in this world because we're too busy packing our bags for the next. And who has not heard stories of overly zealous Christians who are holed up in caves or compounds with barbed wire fences and armed with shotguns, waiting impatiently for the end? So let us be clear. Jesus never really spoke of the end of the world. He spoke of the transformation of the world. He spoke of a radical change that might seem like the end of the world, but was really only the end of the world as people know it, as it currently is. But he says this would be a necessary change so that God's new world could be born. Now, Jesus and his followers are at the temple in Jerusalem, and one of them remarks, "Look at these big stones and big buildings. Aren't they impressive, Jesus?" The temple was the crown jewel of Israel. It was an architectural masterpiece constructed of massive stones plated with sheets of gold. But the temple was more than just a place of worship. It was also the center of their religious identity. It was the center of their national identity. It was also a center of high finance and political power. In the minds of many Jews, the temple was Israel. So no doubt, the disciples are rather startled and appalled when Jesus predicts its total destruction. Take a good look, he says. One day it will all be gone. Not even one stone left on another. Now, anyone who heard him say this would understand that he was really predicting the end of everything that the temple symbolized. If it was destroyed, it would be the end of their political and economic and religious systems. The common belief was that if the temple ceased to exist, so would Israel. It would seem like the end of the world to them. And for all practical purposes, it would be the end of the world as they knew it. Now, it was dangerous to talk that way. It would have sounded subversive, it would have sounded threatening, even like treason. And in fact, talk like that was probably what got Jesus killed. Now, Jesus lived in very turbulent times, times of political corruption, social and economic injustice, terrorism, military empires, and conquered peoples. Jewish rebels fought the Romans, and the Romans fought back. The Jewish king and many of the religious leaders were collaborating with Rome and were seen as traitors to their own people. The Romans imposed very strict laws and cruel punishments. And the temple and the government were not really helping the people who needed help. Now, Jesus did not really have to be clairvoyant to foresee that all of that could not continue much longer before it all fell apart, and fell apart violently. And sure enough, it did. 40 years after Jesus, Jewish rebels staged yet another revolt against their Roman rulers, and for the Romans, this was the last straw. They came in and they destroyed Jerusalem, and they destroyed the temple, and they drove all of the Jews from their homeland. Israel, as a nation, ceased to exist. Now, that's still in the future for our reading today. But today, the disciples asked Jesus, well, when will this happen? What signs should we be looking for? And Jesus answers by describing a time of escalating violence and hardship. Wars, famine, nations turning against each other. But he warns them about some people who will use this climate of fear and chaos to stir people up. And they will offer false hope or wrong solutions to the problems. Some of them will even use Jesus' name to justify their actions. Now, back then, there were many who wanted to use force and violence to change things, even some of Jesus' own followers. And who's to say that they might not try to rally an army in his name? Jesus wants us to attack those people. Let's go fight them in the name of Jesus. But of course, that would go against everything that Jesus stood for. Do not let those people lead you astray, he tells his followers. And do not let these events scare you into abandoning what I have been teaching you. He goes on to say that such times are really opportunities for faith and for hope. He compares these times, these turbulent times, these times of chaos, to labor pains, the pains of a woman giving birth. In those days, as now, the birth of a child was always considered something good. It was considered a blessing. It was new life coming into this world. So Jesus was giving his followers a message of hope and consolation. They were not facing the end of the world, but only of the world as they knew it. The world as it was passing away. But out of this passing, terrible as it might be, would emerge something new. The end of one world would be the beginning of another. And that meant that God would still be with them. God was not going to vanish with the old world. And so their hope and their faith did not have to vanish either. No matter what this new world would be like, no matter how difficult and painful the transition might be, God would be with them through it. Now, we too live in turbulent times, but our times are not really so different from other times. Wars and rumors of wars, nations turning against each other, terrorism, political and economic upheaval, famine in many parts of the world. That's going on right now. And we too have seen some of our temples, those things that we attach so much importance to, those things that we imagine will last forever. We have seen some of those things destroyed or on the verge of collapse. Even Christianity and the church, as they have existed, are undergoing enormous changes. And there have been political and religious leaders who have used these events to prey on our fears and even claim Jesus' name for their agendas. But Jesus tells us we do not need to be afraid. Not that these things aren't scary. They can be scary, but our fear comes from clinging too much to the way things are now, to things that cannot last forever. One big lesson of history, one big lesson of the Bible is that everything we human beings create, whether we build them out of stone or steel, or whether we build them out of certain beliefs and ideas, they are all temporary. Even the lives that we build for ourselves do not last forever. Empires and nations rise and fall. Human beings are born and die. Everything is temporary. Except God. Only God is eternal, and so it is to God that we should cling. It is God in whom we should place our faith and our hope. That's how we learn to live without fear as the things of this world change or pass away, as they inevitably must. And that is how we learn what is truly lasting and important. In 2 weeks, as I mentioned, we begin the season of Advent, a time to prepare for Christmas. Christmas is our celebration of the coming of Jesus Christ into this world, but Advent is a time for reflecting on how and why Christ comes to us, what that really means for us. And sometimes we may forget, under the tinsel and the songs and the Christmas cartoons on TV, sometimes we forget that the coming of Christ is supposed to startle us and shake things up in this world. Again and again, Christ comes to confront the world as it is with the truth of what the world could be and should be. He comes to challenge many of the things that we consider important and even sacred. He comes to warn us that some of our temples are falling. And some of our temples need to fall. All the temples that are built on greed and violence and injustice must fall and eventually will fall. But most of all, Jesus comes to tell us that we cannot have a new world until we let go of the old one. But let us not forget that he also comes to promise us that no matter what happens, God is living and present in our times as he was in the turbulent and chaotic times of the past and will be in the future. God is living and present in every situation, in every world in which we may find ourselves. And even if the world as we know it comes crashing down, God can still bring hope and possibility and new life. Jesus promises that even though everything around us and even our physical existence is temporary and will one day perish, God is with us for eternity. And that should set our hearts at peace so that we can live without fear. And living without fear means that we can live more authentically and more fully. It means that we can truly live for God. Amen.